So feel free, this is a workshop, first of all, so feel free to stop anytime, ask all the questions, there's no problem with that. Just please refrain to take pictures, because you know as the 12 editions is going out, everything that you see is still part of confidential, okay? But because of the community, it's important to start sharing this. So just before we start, I usually get asked 2 questions. You know, people start getting interested about USALI when we moved into the 11th edition and the staff accommodation cost moved below GOP. That really hurts owners, yeah? How many owners are in the room today? Yeah, okay, good. How many operators? Okay, well, nobody's perfect, but... So main point is that it really hurt operators when those lines moved, and now everybody's asking, is there any other change like this? No. I don't think, as a nutshell, there's no any major changes happening, at least on the 12 editions. So we are safe on that. And the second questions I always get asked is it going to get reversed? There's no chance this is going to get reversed, unfortunately. There is a big convergence between the USALI, US GAAP, IFRS, and they're all bringing certain items below GOP, which when you're looking at the way you're doing business, that's also the right things to do, to be honest. So in that perspective, no, we are not going back. So that changes is here to stay. I just want to make this a little bit more fun. So before we start on the 12 editions, because I will let you read most of the slides, because there's very little changes. But I really want to show you why we are talking about USALI and what's this big drama about USALI. Yeah? So first of all, first edition of USALI, 1926. So it's like 100 years old. Just to contextualize, TV was invented in 1927. Okay? Queen Elizabeth was born in 1926 as Marilyn Monroe. Okay? So well past our time. Group of people from New York City decided to get back together and agree on an accounting system, because it's very difficult to compare performance of the hotels if in my departmental cost I put some items and you put other items. So they decided to get together. Mostly 3 groups, 3, let's say, committee of people. Proprietors committee, accountants committee, and then there were 2 advisors, which were the local regulators on accounting. In the proprietor committee, you have property level general managers from the most important hotels in New York City. You have the Waldorf Astoria, you have the Plaza, you have the Biltmore. So from that perspective, it was a very innovators group of people, and they decided to sit down. And that's what set foot for then 11 more editions that growing a little bit in terms of content, but also in terms of participations. So when you look at the differences, this is the 3rd edition of USALI. Just look at this. And this is the 11th edition. So that proves how much work went through in the last 98 years. But also, if you look at the composition of the financial committee of the USALI, which sits in Washington, D.C., nowadays is 28 people. We have 10 owner representatives, 10 operator representatives, and 8, let's say, industry advisors. There is STR, there is Otstat, there are accounting, there is consulting companies. So from that perspective, the group of people that makes decisions on this has widened up, because the USALI is no longer New York-centric or US-centric, is becoming now a standard in the industry worldwide. All of the HMAs that are regulating our hotels, they make reference to the USALI. So any changes that gets decided in Washington, D.C., then applies everywhere else in the world. And sometimes there are big discrepancies, because I don't know if there are many Americans in the room, but usually Americans don't know what the rest of the world means, and they make decisions and they don't know how that impact. Okay? And that, of course, has then a major changes in our industry and in our community. So, unless you have any questions on that, I will probably start with the presentation. And I should probably switch my phone off. So, couple of things. Sure, go ahead. Publication will be, let's say, during October, beginning of November. So they're just finalizing, and it's going to be published both electronic format and on a book format. Keep in mind, The electronic format was only available on the 11 editions because it became so big that in order to search, it's easier to do in electronic format than on a book format. You see how much bookmarks I have put it in here. So for that perspective, it's going to be available. It's also going to be available in subscription format. So you can buy a subscription for 1 year, for example, and then you have access to it. Something that not many people know, but the financial committee of the USALI still meets regularly, even if the book has been published, because there is a mechanism if you are an HFTP members. Okay, HFTP owns the copyright of the book since a few years, since 2018. So you can ask them questions. There is a proper platform on the website. So they meet, they answer to your questions. So most of the cases during the update of the book, all the questions that came up, all the clarifications, and during COVID there have been plenty of clarifications, have been now embedded in the updated version. So in a way, the work never stopped. And that's why if you see, there has been at least 5 updates in the last 50 years or 40 years, okay? So the updates are becoming more and more frequently because the industry is becoming more and more dynamics. We just were in the hotel asset managers meeting before this, and we're discussing about casinos. There's nothing about casinos here yet, but I'm sure sooner or later it will come up. Golf was introduced recently. A casino will be next. All-inclusive is a big discussion at the moment happening, which is not part of this. So, yeah, correct. But if you look at the book per se, there's no, And I guess something that I've not stressed enough is that now the book is structured into 3 parts. You know, you have the profit and loss, you have the balance sheet, you have the KPI ratios, which is 43 pages. Here, the KPI ratios was probably 5 pages. So we have been monitoring the industry in a much more detailed way than what we used to be, okay? In the 12th edition, you will see even more KPIs, and we will see that in a second, especially on utilities and consumptions and energy consumption, so that you can easily compare hotels and hotel consumption across the world. And that is very much ESG compliance, and that would trigger even more drama than the change in the staff accommodation. So, but all in all, first of all, no major changes, so no surprises like the staff accommodation, which is already a good start, especially for owners. We discussed this already, okay? The USALI is a small world. It only regulates lodging industry, okay? But most of the companies that own hotel, WASL, we report in IFRS. So in Europe, same thing. In the US, you have US GAAP. So there has to be certain convergence of things to allow for the conversions in a much more easier way. So we will see more and more of that. And sometimes owners will win, sometimes operators will win, but ultimately that's also the right thing to do, So that's a little bit one point, and we discussed this. There are a few changes. Here you see all the schedules where the changes happens, but ultimately, again, I will let you read most of that. But the major changes that happens are in the balance sheet and in 3 items of the P&L. So very quickly in the balance sheet, we will see that at the end, but we will have 3 new reports. One is in Executive Lounge, which is a sub-schedule of Schedule 1. First time a sub-schedule was introduced mandatory, okay? Usually was only on optional basis. And this is important because Executive Lounge has always been a hidden cost. It's always had into complementary F&B, and then you don't know what's in there. You don't know how many cost, how many people have been upgraded, what's the drama about it. So now there is much more clarity about it, and that's the correct way of reporting. There is a section on FTE, because also that's becoming very opaque at the moment. And then last but not least, there is a new schedule, which is 16, which only happens once a year. And again, it's for transparency purposes. I'm going to move here. The operators and the brand will have to report to owner all the costs and all the fees they have been charging to the owners throughout the year. And again, not mentioning any owners, but any of the operators, but sometimes when hotel staff is using an operator platform to do business, and they lost the password, they need to call a toll number somewhere in the US. The cost of that call is $25. So that's a very high hidden cost. How many times your staff lose passwords? Maybe that's an analysis worth doing. But again, if they lose it 10 times, it's already $250 that you have not even considered when negotiating an HMA. So there are lots of hidden costs that now the operators are requested to put black on white. Once a year, but that's enough for transparency purposes. Then you will really see how much is the cost of the operators and not just base fee and incentive fees. So there is more clarity on segmentations. You will see that we had some issues in the past when you were doing, not yet pictures, if you don't mind. I will, once the publication will done, I will share this, so there's no problem with that. So the OTA discounts and the OPAC had a little bit of a drama in the past. People don't know exactly where to put it. Now it's very clear. It's under discount transient. And again, loyalty redemptions follows into qualified for sure now. Again, is also very clear. The other one about Motor Clubs Association, you can read it yourself. I don't think it's going to be a major game changer. But at least now we got clarity. There is much more clarity on the OTA part, and there is much more clarity, especially in sales and marketing, on the social media and all the cost that goes into that. Loyalty program, another big drama. Do you know how much does loyalty program cost to your hotel? Do you know how much? Every operator has different rules. Do you know how much you're paying for your hotel, for each of your hotels? Do you know how much 1 point costs? Do you know how it is redeemed? Do you know what's happening with those points that the hotel pays for it? I always have a fight with my operators, like, okay, I owned more than 1 million points of one of the major operators because I never used them. If I die tomorrow, who's going to take all those points? They don't go in my inheritance. My kids will not see that. So what happens to that? So the operator will probably pocket it. So for that perspective, there is a lot of clarity that still have to go through the loyalty programs from an operator perspective. Because again, the rules are so different. They're getting so complicated and so different across the brands that is very difficult to compare and is very difficult to calculate. But here at least you have a little bit more of a detailed. So these 3 sections will be included. Some of that will be part of also of Schedule 1. This is how Schedule 1 will look. I will put in yellow. You don't see that? We will have to check in the presentation, but the 2 lines that I had it are highlighted in yellow, but I don't know why for presentation purposes they don't appear. All right. So this is the new schedule in which all the expenses, Club Lounge doesn't have any revenues, so it's only about expenses. But at least here you get a very clear breakdown of how much these expenses are. As an owner, I monitor the amount of free upgrades to Club Lounge access that the operator is giving on a monthly basis. I always do this example. If I buy my room with breakfast, I'm just inventing, 1,000 dirhams, probably it's 800 and 150 for rooms and 150 for breakfast. But if I get a free upgrade to lounge access, lounge has free food throughout the entire day. So the room revenues is 1,000 dirhams and the F&B component is 0. So the hotel automatically has increased its ADR and its room revenues, but also has increased its cost. These will appear into room department, complementary F&B. So it looks very nice to have an higher ADR. It makes a nice RGI. Operators are happy, owners are happy. The bonus is very high for the executive team, but that's a little bit inflated. So now that issue will be monetized more easily, because I know every time I upgrade somebody to Club Lounge, I know how my cost is, and I can calculate that cost per person.
But the reality is little different. You realize that?
Go ahead.
Like when you go to a hotel, how the operators play around it. Because you upgraded for the breakfast to this Club Lounge. But ultimately when you go to the Club Lounge and you compare where is your main breakfast is being served, the varieties are wider. So in fact, it's reality, you can do the benchmarking. People go to the Club Lounge, see the intentionally so that they can go back to the main breakfast area.
I've seen,
This breakfast is used unless you for
I understand the operational implications of it, but the accounting implication, I've noticed across my previous hotels that all the upgrades were the highest rate of the day. How come you never upgrade a lower rate to a club lounge? Because it doesn't help, right? So for that perspective, there is an operational issue, and I agree, the buffet in the club lounge is smaller, the cost is smaller, but that's why you have a breakfast allocation, because from an accounting perspective, you're selling a room with breakfast, and here was not reflected. So this two hotels with the same number of keys, but one has all club lounge access and one has zero club lounge access, will have very different ADR, even though, in fact, they should be the same. So that is leveling that out across different properties. And again, you can start asset managing your club lounge, because de facto is a little bit like a separate F&B venue in your hotel. Yeah? Questions so far? Yeah.
So I'm on the ownership side as well. Looking at
You feel the pain.
definitely. Well, I mean, if I should be thankful, but I don't have an executive lounge in my resort. But the question here is, I'm having an argument with my operator around breakfast being a mandatory service to the guests. They cannot opt out, so therefore there shouldn't be any F&B allocation for breakfast as per certain opaque interpretation of USALI. So then, is there a similar department or some line where these breakfasts should appear in under the room department, the cost of the breakfast?
Well, page 14 of the USALI is the package breakage. So if I'm selling a room with breakfast and with any other services, I'm selling a package. And therefore, there is a very clear calculation on how that should count. That could have an, sorry? Okay. That could have an impact. Sometimes, because you're buying a package and not separate items, there is a discount. So there might be a negative number, but the number should be minimized and controlled. Again, page 14 of the USALI. And that impact should go in miscellaneous. So,
Sorry, I meant the cost side.
mhm.
Similar to what we've done on the executive lounge, is there something analog for when the entire cost of breakfast goes to the room? Because that's effectively what they want to apply.
In the USALI, you have a separate F&B schedule for each of your restaurants.
Correct.
So in your old breakfast room or all day dining, there should be all the cost attached to that schedule.
They want to move it out of F&B department and put it on the rooms department because their logic is it's a mandatory service, therefore it's a rooms revenue, therefore the cost needs to be where the revenue is.
First of all, it shouldn't. And second, it only applies if you are limited services. If you are a two-star hotel and you're giving room and breakfast, it all packed in the ADR, don't bother. You know, the USALI gives you that option. If your hotel is really, really limited service, there's no point calculating. You know, usually the breakfast is limited service in a Premier Inn or it's just, sorry? Exactly. So, correct. So it shouldn't. But unless it's all inclusive.
It is, no, it's not all inclusive.
Okay. So that's what it is. So you should have a separate schedule for your all-day dining. And in your all-day dining, you cannot include the package breakage because, again, that usually goes in miscellaneous. But the first thing I would do is as a breakdown of the package breakage line. And then
Under F&B, though.
and under F&B, all-day dining. Yeah. Other questions? Okay. So now we got a little bit more of metrics in terms of rooms. Again, I'll let you read the first part. The second part is optional. In the USALI, we never had the channel mix before. But any good asset manager would ask, what's your reservation? What's your channel mix? How much is your ADR on your brand.com? As much as your ADR? Correct. And I'm very upset when I see the sales on brand.com much lower than 20% or 18% of your booking.com. Because if I'm selling my room on booking.com at 100 and I pay 15 dirhams of commissions, is 85. But if I sell on brand.com at 70, then you know what? Close your brand.com, go on booking.com. I don't need you guys. So that now, it's optional, okay? But of course, if owners are pushing for it, first of all, owners, I mean, every owner that I know and any member of the USALI Asset Managers Association is already asking for it. We actually compare notes about it, but any owner should have a very clear understanding on the channels and the mix, because ultimately that's probably your largest cost line, especially for rooms. And I don't know if your hotel is independent or part of a group, but your booking.com fees can be very hefty. Independent hotels in Europe sometimes get 22%. It's very difficult to make money after that. So, okay. So, and I guess that's what's more important is your brand.com, which is compared also to your mobile app, but also on the fact that you have GDS and OTA separately, so that you can also monitor the commission structure for each of these. So again, this is going to be the optional schedule that will come up. I would recommend everybody to already ask for it because it's very, very valuable information to monitor the revenue and the direct cost of your business. Now, we're entering the F&B section, and F&B in the last 5 years or 10 years, especially in hotel, has changed a lot. Before, you had the same operator running the all-day dining, the specialty restaurant, the kiosk, the ice cream stand, and everything else. Now you have a leased outlet or a collaboration outlet. So it's very difficult to understand all this revenue, where do they go? Is that really F&B? Is that other departmental? Is that miscellaneous? So that's a little bit of the definition of F&B outlet, okay? So it's a little bit of a diagram, yes or no. Is this happening? Yes. Is this happening? Yes. So it's a guidance that the financial committee is giving to everybody to better understand what's the nature of the business that takes place in that specific space. Yeah. So you see that if the food is prepared by the hotel kitchen, then it's clearly an F&B outlet. But sometimes, and you will see here, sometimes you have small shops or kiosks. When you buy sandwiches that are already packed by Pret-a-Manger or somebody else and delivered there, there's no involvement of any kitchen. There's no involvement of any hotel staff. It's a grab and go. That is not really an F&B outlet, is it? So that one, in fact, should be probably in minor operating department. Or sometimes, if there is a minimal impact of the labor of your hotel, so there is a little bit more of a contribution from a labor perspective, that should go in other operating department. So now it's very clear, no matter what's the contract regulating your relationship with the F&B operator of that space or the nature of the business taking place of that space, now you can clearly identify where it goes. And that helps a lot because when you're comparing hotels with hotels, other operating departments is a plethora of things. And depending, what you put in it, you might overperforming or underperforming your peers. Now, miscellaneous income. I know other operating departments in miscellaneous income are not really worthy much when you deduct rooms and F&B. That's probably 80% of the hotel, and if you're lucky, 20%. But it's still, there was lots of doubt and lots of gray areas in these two sections. So the financial committee requested to have certain items specifically included. It doesn't apply so much in the UAE, but especially in the US, in the Caribbean, in the away, in Pacific Ocean, you have resort fees, which are compulsory. So instead of having a rate plus, 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 you have a rate plus, 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 plus. Because, so is resort fee part of the ADR? Not really, it isn't. Is the resort fee charged back? How does it work? So now it's very clear. Resort fee has been, a part of the destination, so there is a separate line for that. So it's very clear where to apply for it. Sorry, go ahead. All right. There's no clear answer on that. It's a little bit like service charge in the UAE, okay? Part of the service charge goes back to the hotel. So it's not really service charge, is it? So usually the resort fee came because when you're managing a larger resort, there is lots of landscaping, there is lots of maintenance, which are not strictly resort driven. And if you embed that in your ADR, then you should be charging a fantastic ADR, but in reality, it's all cost attached to it. So when you're comparing ADR with other resorts that don't have the same level of cost, you won't be comparing apple with apple. So that's where the idea came out. And also a little bit to, I would say from a marketing perspective, you see online that the rate is only $150 a night, but then at checkout, you see that that has increased considerably because of the VAT, the service charge, and the resort fees. So in a way, it's also a way to market more properly the pricing and to attract people that would otherwise would be scared by the level of rate. But most of the resort fees that I've seen, especially in the US, and Reina, maybe you're also familiar with that, is to recover the cost. So there's if there is any markup, it's very, very minimal. Yeah. So this is how, okay, in here you see the text, so I'm very happy. Here you see how the changes are happening in the miscellaneous schedule. Now, sales and marketing, it's another big discussions. In the last few years, social media, digital marketing became probably the priority in terms of marketing the hotel and the F&B outlets. So nobody knew exactly where those costs would have to go. So now you have paid search, display, and social that are clearly identified as part of the cost, and therefore you know that that is definitely included in that. In sales and marketing, you also have the additions of the loyalty promotion and loyalty program cost, because at the moment everything is one line, so it's very difficult to see the detail of it. Now you will be able to see much more details, and that improve the transparency of the loyalty program. So, go ahead. No, that's going to be on a separate line. Because you're talking about the loyalty promotions. This is on property, but the digital part is all digital, so it's not related to brand. It's the action that the individual hotel is taking. While when you're looking at loyalty promotion cost, then that's part of the contribution for your loyalty program. So that is brand driven.
So you have the loyalty from the brand, and then you also have marketing.
Correct. You have loyalty from the brand, and then you have the general marketing from the brand. That remains where it is. No, it's still in one big line, but at least the loyalty has been carved out and has two separate lines in that. Okay. And now, what I wanted to say, the digital cost might be digital cost also for F&B venues. It does not have to be rooms. In fact, most of my hotels are spending more money on Instagram and Facebook for their restaurants rather than for the hotels, because it's a different engaging the community. It's a different way of doing business. So that one now is mirrored into the changes. Again. There is a new line you will see about collateral, video promotion, videography. So this cost has been excluded from the marketing and agency fee. Okay. I don't know why some lines don't show up, but in the presentation that will be shared, you will see all the line with the new schedule. Now, sustainability. I don't know how many of you have been in the panel yesterday on ESG, but sustainability is becoming the obsession of all my colleagues of our Hotel Asset Manager Association in Europe and the US. There is corporate tax cuts that are interesting. There is certain carbon footprint that you need to commit or reduce. So it's becoming really the most important topic to discuss. The USALI has followed that. So there have been some changes in the utilities and maintenance. Which again, sorry guys, it's a little bit boring conversation, but that's the way it is. So each hotels across the world will report not only the cost consumption of energy, but also the KPIs attached to it, and the consumptions in terms of kilowatt hours, in terms of liters of water, in terms of how much from renewable energy. So there has been much more focused on the environmental part and the environmental impact of the hotels. Because if you cannot measure it, you cannot monitor and you cannot reduce it. So because now hotels are owned by large groups and large real estate funds, when they have an ESG reporting that they need to do to the shareholders, then also need to be able to measure that accordingly. So first change, before the line was called utilities or energy, now it's called EWW, energy, water, and waste. The reason why I'm focusing on waste is because waste used to be in maintenance, which was the line above, and now it moved to utilities, which is more correct, okay? Because that's part of the utilities embedded, okay? And several KPIs have been introduced, especially in the KPI section in part 2, talking about the consumptions. We will see that in a second. And therefore, you can also track. Now, why is that important? I've noticed, mostly in Europe, but it's coming up globally, tour operators stop sending their guests to your hotel if you're not ESG compliant, at least in Europe, and especially German tour operators, which are very obsessed with environment. On big corporate platforms for events, C-Event, Leon, they have had all the corporate proposals, they have had the questions about what is your hotel doing in terms of ESG. If you don't answer with the right answer, you don't get the business. So for that perspective, something is creating a nice answer and something is being able to monitor that and to propose a certain report that the hotel proactively does, okay, to offset that. And that also get embedded in the ultimate ownership and in the other shareholders related to that hotel. It could be destination. We have seen earlier, Dubai is launching their own, let's say, green sort of certificates for the hotels. So that's all part of a larger movement that needs to be taken on. And that's the way, again, to take that on board. So there is a reclassification. There is an expansion on the KPIs part and the consumption, and on the metrics. So you see here a little bit more of details. Energy from one line became 4. And what I really like is the renewable energy line, but also the vehicle fuels. We never really monitor that, you know, and transportation is also a big impact on CO2 emissions. So that also have to be measured. And then when it comes water, and again, maybe for a city hotel or for a suburban hotel is not that relevant, but imagine a golf resort, okay? Water is a massive cost, especially in this part of the world where grass don't really come up so naturally. So it's important to monitor which type of water you are reusing, how is that treated, and so on. So this is becoming a little bit of an obsession of the financial committee. And in terms of, again, fuel, you see there is different classifications because each of these has a different impact in terms of CO2 emissions, different cost. And I know it's not the right environment, but when I speak to my colleague in Europe, energy in the last 2 years has increased 30%. Heating has increased 30%. So for them, becoming environmentally sustainable and reduce that cost is the only way forward because that increase in 30% has reduced your bottom line. Sorry. No questions is stupid. The KPIs are very global because, you know, the cost is very local. In this part of the world, the cost of electricity is much cheaper than Europe, but the consumption, a kilowatt per hour per occupied room, is the same. The same metrics is applicable all over the world. Now, because of air conditioning, I'm assuming we are going to consume more energy than Sweden, okay? But in the winter, because of heating, we are going to consume less than Sweden. So all in all, it allows for comparison with all the nuances of the climate and the geographies, you know. An island resort will spend a lot on fuel because of the boat connection. But an airport hotel will probably not spend anything on, fuel. So there are, of course, nuances attached to the specific characteristic of your property, but at least you can compare airport hotel with airport hotel. And you can compare, you know. So that definitely is a massive step forward for a better comparison. And when you can compare, you can rank. So across all the hotels in Dubai, these are the top 5. These are the top 10. And that's a fact. So nobody can argue that, okay? Then that allows also for implications on green financing. It applies on implication on investment. It applies on lots of other implications. So for that perspective, it sets the tone to build from that. If I am in the top 5 in Dubai, I go on booking.com and I'm going to have for a special recognition, just to set an example. So for that perspective, again, just because it's like inventing numbers for the first time. Just now we have numbers, now we know what is 1, what is 2, what is 3. So we can measure it, we can compare it, we can say something about it, and of course that has a massive implication then worldwide. I'm surprised we are discussing this in 2024, almost 2025. We should have probably done it 15 years ago, but yeah, what to do? It's never too late, yeah? Does this answer your question? Okay, all right, fantastic. Voila. So renewable energy is key because there is a big emphasis, and again, this comes from US, Europe type of approach. Just for your understanding, since 2006, the USALI is translated into German. Okay, and you know how much Germany is really at the forefront of renewable energy and the kind of legislation that happens over there. So that is a result of that type of politics that came out, where they wanted to clearly measure, because in Germany, renewable energy is part of your tax cut-off. So if an hotel can measure it, they can get a cut-off from their taxes, from their corporate taxes, which here is 9, but in Germany is much higher than that. There is incentives, and there are, especially in Europe, not only in Germany, there are 2 types of incentives. You pay less taxes, so very clear, you know, if I pay less taxes, I'm happier. Second, if I can demonstrate that I can reduce my consumption and my CO2 consumptions, I get government subsidies to pay for that investment. So for that perspective, it's a double win, because I get free money for a project that I should be doing anyway, and then I get better bottom line and get tax cut. So again, that's why people in Europe are obsessed with that. And I don't know, Singapore is the same, yeah. I don't know how many were in the panel yesterday on ESG, but in Europe, big institutional investors are not buying properties anymore that are not ESG compliant. Because if I buy a property not compliant, it goes on my reporting to the shareholders, doesn't look nice. So becoming ESG is inevitable, otherwise I'm putting my asset outside of the market. My asset becomes illiquid. Nobody wants that. So it's not yet the case in the GCC, but you know, the wave is happening, so we need to start monitoring it. Questions so far? Yeah. Sorry, from? It's very difficult to say, yeah? It's very difficult. Depends on the location, depends on the brand, depends on the layout, depends on so many things. But if you're developing, then you need to go for a platinum certificate, you need to go for one of those green, yes, LEED certificate. That would definitely help you. How much is the difference in CapEx? I don't think an analysis has ever been done, at least I'm not aware of it, and has nothing to do with the USALI, because it's the development. But the issue that we're having is that most of the hotel supply has been built before ESG, and retrofitting has a cost, and that's why all the governments came up with subsidies. But even with subsidies, imagine in Italy there is a big, again, big drama. How can I put solar panel on an heritage building, which is a national monument? You know? So even if I want, I can't, because the same regulation, the same government is asking me to do it, but is also asking me not to do it. So I need to find alternative ways to find the solutions. And yesterday, I guess you mentioned the lime paint. There is a special paint that absorbs CO2. I can paint an heritage building with lime paint because I need to paint it every 5 years anyway. So, you know, that helps me at least to recover some of that. Or in some cases, big institutional investors, they're buying land somewhere, they plant trees, and it says, I offset my hotel in Milan city center with this land in Costa Rica, and the trick is done. It's big money, okay, but it's still work, okay? But that also improve your classifications. Again, not happening in the GCC, but when you're buying a dishwasher or a washing machine, it has a classification A, B, C, D. That is applicable for real estate assets in Europe since more than 10 years. So when I'm buying an apartment, I know how energy friendly or energy consuming that unit is because of the window, because of the exposure, because of the insulation, so certain assets that are D or E or F, they will not be traded. So that helps you increasing your classification. Maybe does not have an impact yet on the value. We've seen it yesterday. No valuer will apply a different cap rate or a different discount rate so far because there's not been any evidence in the market, okay? But as soon as the transactions will go on, evidence will come up, and therefore then it will have an impact on the value as well. So we are a little bit of an early stage on that, but it's definitely something that is coming. So I'd rather be, if something is coming, I'd rather be on the top ranking than in the low ranking, yeah? So let's see the metrics. Mostly of the metrics is consumption per occupied room. There's no point of measuring consumption per available room, but technically from a mathematical perspective, you can do all the calculation that you want. But on a per occupied room is the one that makes more sense, okay, globally. Okay, so these are the new metrics. And you see, there is also this issue which, fun enough, was very important for the financial committee. How do you measure water? Liters. No, we measure in gallons. So that becomes another issue. So you measure either gallons or cubic meter, okay, of water, and then you just convert, but you can still convert and compare. So no matter which unit you want to use, as long as you measure it, you are compliant. Yeah. All the waste that gets removed from the hotel, okay? At the moment, there are two major costs of the waste. It's called the waste recycle and the waste transportation. There is an external company come and taking your waste. That waste is weighted. So the kilos of that waste is the measurement. Now, within the waste, you can differentiate. Again, you were in HAMA meeting earlier, how much is kitchen waste and how much is other waste and how much is plastic waste. So that details will soon follow up, okay? I'm not saying in the 13 editions, but when you look at the granularity of things, especially from a recycling perspective, that definitely come up. But at the moment, the only consumptions that is very clear worldwide is the weight. Does this answer your question? All right. Keep that in mind, and just gonna make a digression because I see people are doing this. If I open this book and I look at the costs, I find switchboard operator, okay? I find stamps, okay? Those were costs that the USALI was telling you, you need to put it into A&G, into this line. Who buys stamps in 2024? Who has a switchboard? If you have a switchboard operator in 2024, you must have a trouble. So there have been lots of cost replacement on that. So as the industry evolves, then also the metrics will evolve, okay? I think is in this edition, one of the department was cigar stand. Now, it even monitors cigar consumptions in your hotel, unless you have an F&B outlet called Cigar Lounge, So it sounds so funny because it sounds so aged, but it's still, it's 80 years ago. Does that answer a little bit more of a funny way? Okay. So, leasing income. Now, this is key. I just want to do a digressions on that, just to try to wake you up a little bit more. staff accommodation. Yeah? When I say staff accommodation, everybody wakes up. Why it moved below GOP? Because in this part of the world, the owners pays for staff accommodation, and he usually pays in one check to another company, and he's renting out a full building. Okay, that is a lease. Technically, if I'm leasing a photocopy machine for 1 year, and they pay with one check, that should also go below GOP. It's not an A&G cost. Every item that is leased, one check, no matter on consumption, paid by the owner, is below GOP. Why is that? Because GOP is gross operating profit. So your operation, if I'm using 80% or 100% of my staff accommodation, is not operation. So technically speaking. So that's why IFRS and US GAAP moved it below GOP.
You need a copier for your operation.
But I can buy a copy, a photocopy machine, and that becomes on my balance sheet, and the electricity goes in here. But if I'm leasing it, I can buy a car, okay, and use it for gas transportation. But if I'm leasing it, it does not matter how many trips the car does. This is what I pay every year. That should be below GOP. So everything that is, I'm calling it leasing for sake of a better world, US GAAP and IFRS says this has really nothing to do on how well you manage your business from an operational perspective. That should go below GOP. In hotel, it's questionable. Outside of hotels, it's clear. If I am Amazon, a copy machine has nothing to do with my business, so it should go down. Or leasing a car, So when IFRS is for all the industries in the world, so when you scale that up, it makes sense. Now, the application specifically on hotels is a little bit gray, but because of this convergence, it still makes sense to have it below GOP. So,
Yeah, just on that point though, historically it was always above GOP.
yes.
Cost of doing business to have stuff, otherwise where you're going to have your employees when your visa structures are put in a way where you have to provide accommodation. So does that mean that if I take that lease and then I enter the individual lease agreements with staff, then they become an operating cost? Because there's other ways you can do it.
Yeah, all right. But
But ultimately the operators have all benefited because that big cost.
I agree.
Gone below the GOP, and the GOP, obviously, the value has gone up and the fees have gone up.
Look, your housing allowance cost hasn't moved. It's still part of your departmental costs.
Yeah, so therefore, if you move everybody into giving them a housing allowance, but you get that paid back into the
Correct. But you need to pay in multiple checks and giving checks, so you're also increasing your administration cost. Imagine doing that on a monthly basis. So in a way, I understand where you're coming from. That is a nice Italian way to skip that up and to bring the cost up, okay? But ultimately here we are discussing why the decision was taken, why the financial committee decided to make that. Two major points. One is that if IFRS is doing it and US GAAP is doing it, in Italy we say if you are surrounded by two police people and they go in one direction, you're also going in that direction. So in a way, if bigger players are doing it, it's inevitable. Second, in the US, in Europe, most of the hotels are under a lease. Let's say 70, 75% have a lease, so it doesn't really apply. In US, yes, you have management agreements, but you don't have staff accommodation cost. Hotels in all the major cities in the US, they don't rent out staff accommodation. They give sometimes housing allowance, sometimes nothing. So they didn't see the implication of that, okay? Because, again, I repeat, this financial committee is very, very US driven. There are two people that are not in the US. One is in Canada, which doesn't really count, and one sits in Singapore. So they don't really have this global perspective, but that's why after the 11th edition, they have created a pool of people that reviews the USALI before it gets published, so we can give feedback in order to avoid major, I'm not saying mistake, but major implications, okay, before the book actually gets black and white. So, but again, even if that would have been a feedback, that would have happened anyway. So now it's up to owner/asset manager to identify a way to overcome that loss in incentive fees, because ultimately that's what we're talking about. Yeah, but you can engage with the operator and say, sorry, parity of performance, now I'm paying you this amount more in incentive fees, I don't think it's fair, we need to deduct that. That's also a way to offset it without going through all the admin additional cost. It depends on which relationship you have with your operator. Yeah.
Depends, I mean, we have negotiated with the HMA and other ones where AGOP for the food.
Correct. I have to say, this was very good. I'll just go to the other two questions later, but sometimes HMA made reference to USALI 9 edition, because that was the moment when the HMA was signed. So I've seen some owners that says, no, it says USALI 9 edition, you cannot fool me now with this. That's a way to handle it. Some other HMA said latest USALI edition, if you have a fight with the operator, legally he wins, but still, you know, it's not always a fight with the operators. Most of the time is sitting down and having an open conversation. So it's not just that necessarily that hardcore, you know. Sorry, two questions. Nikos. I only have 3 minutes left. I thought it would have been boring, but...
Again, the staffing accommodation and the definition of the AGOP.
There's no definition of AGOP in USALI. You set up your own definitions as per HMA.
Common is, GOP minus the user.
I've seen GOP minus base fee.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. But I've seen GOP minus base fee FF&E. I've seen GOP minus base fee FF&E insurance. I've seen minus property taxes in your...
What about the staff accommodation?
In the new ones, it's going to come up, but I would be even wider and says your incentive fees is in your net profit. You know, and then whatever it is, it has to happen before net profit anyway. So no matter, I'm future-proofed. Yeah. So it depends again on the negotiation. Next time you need a negotiation, I'll come. Sorry, you wanted to ask something else?
Another amateur question. Pre-opening expenses, could that not be included as a capital cost of the...
You already see the presentation? It's in here. I know I have 2 minutes left, so... okay, so this one we discussed. We discussed the additional, I'll just get to there because it's included now. It's included both in the P&L and in the balance sheet. Okay, so I just want to quickly go through the balance sheet. Okay, so unrealized gains or losses doesn't really apply much here, but now with corporate tax, this might be a relevant point that you want to add. Right of use assets, which is go back to the lease below GOP conversation that we just had. If I pay to use BMW for 1 year, that's part of my balance sheet for 1 year. Okay, so it should go there because I have a cost associated to that in my P&L. Now, key money, which was also we discussed, that should be also part of the balance sheet. Okay, okay, that's the part. But there is also, there you go, where it changes. Up, okay, there is, let me just go up. In non-operating income and expenses, you have pre-opening, yeah? So now it's going to be part of your P&L, yeah. And it's also correct, because technically, you should be monitoring that, you should be amortizing that, there should be different source of funding for it, different source of funding for it. So should have a separate line and have their own merit within the P&L. Does this answer your question? So now it's very clear, you see, done. I think what was funny, I don't know if I included here, it was balance sheet, okay. It's now the decision tree. Because of outsourcing and FTEs, it's getting so difficult to understand, yeah? I have to say, some of the people I'm talking with, they say, oh, it's FTE, they don't even know the definition of it. It's full-time equivalent. It's not full-time employees. Yeah, that's headcount, and this is different. So if I have 2 people working 4 hours, it's 1 full-time equivalent. So now, because lots of hotels, even in this part of the world, are going into an outsource model, Europe has a massive wave. I would say 80% or even more of your housekeeping is no longer employee staff. And in Europe, you don't pay visas, you don't pay staff accommodation, you don't pay insurance, you don't pay, so it's even cost lighter, okay? Here in this part of the world, you need to give meals and airlift. Only the admin cost of that is massive. So now it's very clear, most of the hotel would prefer to outsource. It's actually better financially. Maybe from a customer perspective, we will have to discuss that, but it's definitely better financially. So we have to monitor, was it outsourced, what is not outsourced, yeah? And I think this is it, but we have, oh, zero. We have 2 more questions, yeah, خلاص. Ladies first. All right, so the USALI is not the law. The USALI is a guideline, is a manual on what you should be doing, okay, and what the entire world should be doing to live in a perfect world, so that we can compare things. If you decide, if you're an independent hotel and you decided not to follow USALI, you can. There's nothing against that. You don't get any penalty, you don't get any punishment, nothing at all. So if any operator, for whatever reason, decide to make a change in their accounting, they're not USALI compliant, okay? But if the HMA says you need to be USALI compliant, then there is a catch-22, all right? So it says, no, this is not as per USALI. And the more detailed the USALI become, the more catch-22 you will find. Package breakage is a big one. You will see maybe in the 12th edition. So I would say, if everything is, if your HMA says latest USALI, as long as the change gets implemented, they should be fully on board. That goes double ways, meaning any changes that helps you, they are obliged, but any changes that helps them, you are obliged. So watch out, you cannot play yes this year and no next editions because, yeah. Oh, by the way, the 12th edition is coming, but it's implementable 1st of January 2026. Okay, so we got lots of time for it. So you can read the fine print of the book before that. Sorry, one last question.
Regarding the pre-opening expenses, can we amortize?
Of course. I mean, you should already be amortizing it, but that's a balance sheet and not a P&L. But here, you want to put that because, of course, it's key to monitor that as well. Balance sheet and key money, they never appeared in any of the book, and that's not correct. They're becoming more and more practice. And look at the Royal Atlantis pre-opening expenses. If you bring Beyoncé, that's a massive pre-opening cost, yeah? So you want to make sure it's monitored correctly, yeah? Any other questions? Happy to take it outside. Thank you very much. It was very nice.